From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. Overnight airstrikes by Israeli forces have killed at least 6 Palestinians and destroyed several buildings in the Gaza Strip in yet another rise of violence. The Hamas-run television station Al-Aqsa TV was one of the targets. Israeli airstrikes pounded the media building after Hamas evacuated. This renewed violence escalated after a covert Israeli operation inside the Gaza Strip left at least 7 Palestinians dead on Sunday.
We were at home getting ready to go to sleep when we got a call from the neighbors and employees of the TV station that the Israelis would target the Al-Aqsa TV. As in every war, it is a target.
As soon as we saw rockets, we ran away from the house. We're civilians. We don't have weapons and rockets. So, as soon as we heard the shelling warning fire, we escaped.
Israel has also bombed a hotel in the Gaza Strip and claimed to have destroyed Hamas's military intelligence operation and spying capabilities. At least 8 people were injured during the blast in the Al Amal hotel. The building was located near a school and was in a heavily populated area. This is the most serious fighting that has occurred since the Israeli assault on Gaza in 2014. Meanwhile, hundreds of Palestinians have attended the funeral of another man killed during Sunday's violence. 22-year-old Mohammed Uda was buried in the city of Beit Liha in the Gaza Strip. The fighting began when an Israeli special operations team was discovered inside Gaza. They called in airstrikes to cover their retreat. One of the Israeli soldiers and a Hamas military commander were among the dead in the first round of violence. Palestinian fighters have responded with a barrage of rockets fired into southern Israel. One Israeli man was killed when a residential building suffered a direct hit in the coastal town of Ashkelon. Hamas has threatened to extend its rockets fire into the towns of Beersheba and Ashdod, further inside Israel. Now on to Mexico, where a group of journalists have reported that at least 2,000 mass graves have been found across the country in the last 10 years. Almost 3,000 bodies were recovered from the graves in 24 different locations throughout the country. Authorities in 8 states refused to collaborate with the investigations. Relatives of those missing accused the state of lacking the will to find their loved ones, as well as the persons responsible for their disappearance.
We don't know what happened to them. The Attorney General office says there is a number of disappeared, but in the news we learn it's really another one. We don't have a rule of law. This is what our country really deserves.
In our case, most of us mothers have searched for our children digging ourselves. It is very painful and sad, and even more as we recognize that it was the state that disappeared them.
The journey to the U.S. has proved to be even more difficult for LGBT members of the migrant caravan. Many have reported being faced with hostility from local residents after arrival to the city of Tijuana as the first group of the caravan. They arrived at the local bus station to make their way to a shelter provided for by a donor. But before they could even get through the door, they were met with opposition from neighbors who voiced their disapproval at their presence.
We're surprised, impacted, we're uncomfortable because the authorities didn't consider us. There is a municipal president here, a delegation that should have told us. Neighbours were asking for your support, your collaboration. People are going to come.
A small group from the first migrant caravan in Mexico has already reached Tijuana, which is on the U.S. border. But the bulk of the caravan is still on its way to Guadalajara. Our correspondent Pablo Perez has more.
Well, today we're right here at the outskirts of Irapuato city in the state of Guanajuato, Mexico. And right now we're seeing how all these migrants, they are members of the first migrant caravan, are trying to board freight trailers to go all the way to Guadalajara, Jalisco, which is the next stop scheduled for this caravan. Right now we can see that very common image of the migrants riding the train that they name the beast, it's no longer the most usual way to travel for them. They are trying to get a ride from the freight drivers, and well, this is something really different, because there is some willingness to do that. It has to be. If there is the police officers, they are asking every driver if they are taking the migrants by their own will, or they are getting paid, or because getting paid for that will be considered a misdemeanor. But if the driver says, no, I'm giving them a ride from my own goodwill, they cannot stop him. So this is another way for them to get faster to the border. And let's remember that we have already covered over 700 miles, but we have 1,500 on our way to go to Tijuana. That's the border with San Diego, California, which is the entry point. Most of these migrants will consider their destiny. And well, we will go on informing you, and we'll go back to the study.
And another group of migrants is fast approaching Mexico City from the southern state of Veracruz. Several groups of migrants have joined together to travel through the state on Mexico's Gulf Coast. Some walked down the highway, while others jumped onto the back of a truck to catch a ride north.
We're looking for help to get rides on trailers or something like that, to leave the state of Veracruz. Sometimes rumors come up of someone going missing of one thing or another. We prefer to arrive in Puebla and keep advancing from there. Wherever we are, we advance north as much as we can.
A new investigation has opened against Peru's former president, Alberto Fujimori, this time related to false sterilizations. The prosecutor, Marcelita Gutierrez, accused Fujimori and 3 of his former ministers of the practice, which took place during Fujimori's term in office. According to the Ombudsman's office, nearly 300,000 forced tubal ligations were performed between 1996 and 2001. Over 2,000 women reported being sterilized without their consent or proper information about the procedure. Members of the public health system in Peru have been on strike for 6 days after being repressed by security forces. More in this report.
Peruvian security forces fired tear gas canisters and rubber bullets against public hospital workers, stopping them from getting near to the premises of the Ministry of Health. Workers have been on strike for 6 days without reaching an agreement with government officials.
The government prioritizes political issues instead of prioritizing people's health. We will continue marching. We will discuss these issues in different meetings because we have the conviction within us. We are worthy and we deserve some respect.
Delegations of hospital workers from across Peru have joined the strike in Lima. They set up tents outside the Ministry of Health, where they plan to remain indefinitely until the government finds a solution for their demands.
From Puno, the most forgotten region, where anemia has increased by 73%, where there are 22 maternal deaths caused by pneumonia. From there, we support this measure to show this government that we need some answers. We raise our voices and will continue fighting.
Delegations from the north of the country have also arrived, expecting the government to deliver bonds that by law belong to the health workers for having worked in extraordinary conditions under the El Niño phenomenon of 2017.
In Piura, we had 547 health workers that got sick with dengue. And even while carrying that sickness, we had to show up to work. We had 3 co-workers who died, 2 of them with dengue, and who was driving an ambulance when he was caught by a landslide. His body was never found. And the only thing the government has done is to declare him a national public health hero.
These workers demand an increase on public health funds to get hospitals out of crisis. They also demand salaries increase and the hiring of 95,000 more workers under new agreements to give them work stability.
Time for the first break of this newscast. More news in a minute.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Over 500 members of Colombia's indigenous communities arrived to the capital, Bogota, after a 5-day journey to condemn the massacres they face in their territories.
After traveling for 5 days, about 500 people from indigenous communities in Chocó arrived in Bogotá. They are here to condemn the many massacres they have witnessed on their lands, as well as forced displacement and the lack of security guarantees from the government.
This government has turned back our rights. They haven't given us guarantees for our lives or our land. They haven't been willing to talk to us, so we are forced into taking this sort of action.
Security forces were unable to stop the protesters, who decided to start a peaceful march after their buses were blocked from advancing.
They are not respecting us as indigenous campesinos. We couldn't sleep all night. We had to walk all through the night.
Holding a stick that represents the defense of indigenous lives and lands, the protesters call this a historic battle.
We are following the path set by our ancestors. We are standing up for their legacy.
This is why they have condemned the return of violence after President Iván Duque came to power.
Armed conflict has gotten worse in our lands due to the presence of illegal groups in the region. We are being displaced, we are being confined, we are being threatened. There have even been conflicts within our communities.
Protesters reached the headquarters of the National Indigenous Organization of Colombia, where they plan to remain until President Iván Duque responds to their demands. They want guarantees that the rights of indigenous communities will be respected.
The general strike in Costa Rica against the government's proposed tax reform has entered its 10th week. On Monday, teachers' unions presented an official complaint to the International Labour Organization. The education sector also presented a complaint against the government, condemning violations against the rights of trade unions. The strike began in September to protest a tax reform demonstrators say could hurt the most vulnerable. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, brings us more.
It's been 2 months since the indefinite general strike started. Recently, more than 8,000 education workers and government employees joined the strike. A large part of the debate about the strike has been its legality, with different courts upholding its legality since it started back in September 10th. This has seen a huge support to the labor sector against the tax reform, which is being debated right now in the Constitutional Court. This court has to decide if the reform is unconstitutional or not. If they approve it, it will then move to the Legislative Assembly as a final step before being approved. Still, discussions about other ways to overcome the tax deficit in Costa Rica continue.
The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has said it is concerned about the situation in Brazil following the recent election of Jair Bolsonaro. The commission said it is particularly worried about the future of Brazil's minorities once Bolsonaro assumes power on January 1st. In the run-up to the polls, Bolsonaro continuously made derogatory comments against Afro-Brazilians, women, and the LGBT community.
We're concerned because of these statements and what we in the international human rights community designate clear hate speeches that were made. So we're very concerned, and this is why we'll closely monitor.
Landslides have killed at least 15 people in Rio de Janeiro. After days of heavy rains, a great stone fell from a hillside in the Piranesi Ninga district, hitting a group of houses. During the night, according to the local fire services, 4 people are missing. So far, 11 have been rescued with the help of sniffer dogs. Close to 200 emergency personnel are working in the area with the help of volunteers, creating a bucket chain to remove mud and debris.
This is not a surprise tragedy because the civil defense goes up the hill and says that it is forbidden to live there, but they do not set up a house, do not create a project, nor give anyone a shelter somewhere else. Where will the poor live?
Argentina's Senate will be discussing the national budget for 2019 in a special session on Wednesday. The bill has already been approved by the lower house. Now, experts argue that if the bill is approved, the public sector and society will suffer greatly.
People are feeling the pressure of living under austerity due to the government's adjustments. They're suffering and they've had enough. They're turning to their MPs with their complaints and want them to find a way out of this turmoil.
What we are seeing now is not only a budget cut that means the erosion of our sectors, but also the denial of basic human rights.
The government has managed to get the 2019 budget to the Senate. The bill proposed by the ruling party has the approval of the lower house. If passed, the budget in public spending will be significantly slashed and the economy will go down by 5%, according to analysts. The new law will guarantee the interest of the International Monetary Fund and of international corporations.
Argentina is going to have to spend the next years with conflicting priorities. So, instead of worrying about the great internal debt to the social movements, workers, and public sectors, they're going to worry about the brutal external debt. And this is going to hurt the majority of people.
As part of a $57 billion agreement with the International Monetary Fund, the government of Mauricio Macri agreed to decrease its subsidies and cut public jobs.
It's a budget focused on decreasing public spending. That's going to hurt a lot of people. And it's a budget lacking credibility because in the 2019 projections, they talk about 23% inflation.
On Wednesday, the bill will be put before the Senate to advance the adjustment plans. Through this, many believe the government hopes it can better integrate with the nations of the G20, who are set to visit Argentina by the end of this month.
Trinidad and Tobago has been rocked by a 3.9 magnitude earthquake, the latest in a series to rock the island. The earthquake was also felt in neighboring Grenada. Now, no injuries or damage were sustained. A warning was issued earlier this month about moderate to strong earthquakes following a 6.9 quake that struck the country in August. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel is making a stopover in the United Kingdom before he heads to the West Indies as part of his international diplomatic tour. More in this report.
The Cuban president's tour started early in the month. Miguel Diaz-Canel visited Russia, the Democratic Republic of Korea, China, Vietnam and Laos. His tour is particularly timely as the right wing in Latin America is making waves and Cuba's relations with the United States are fraying.
This tour has been very balanced. It has upheld its foreign policy objectives and has strengthened ties with countries that are of utmost importance on the international stage and remain friends of the island.
Miguel Diaz-Canel was received by the premiers of each country, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping.
It's important the new Cuban president formed close connections with the highest leaders of these countries. He has to prove that Cuba is not alone and has friends across the world.
In every country he visited, he explored opportunities for greater cooperation in business and managed to achieve agreements to this effect. For instance, Russia has agreed to invest in the technological sector of Cuba, and in return there will be investment opportunities for entrepreneurs and the government.
These are strategic relations. Trade with Russia reaches nearly $300 million, which doesn't reach the levels of trade with China that surpass $1 billion. But it's still an important source of investment in transportation, in energy production, and in railway infrastructure. Another topic that was discussed in Russia is cooperation in military matters. Diaz-Canel even mentioned the possibility of exporting Cuban products to China, which has the largest market in the world.
This tour has proven to the world, and particularly the United States, that Cuba is far from isolated, and despite the 60-year blockade, it's business as usual.
Time for another break. Stay with us. Welcome back. British cabinet ministers have arrived at Downing Street as Brexit negotiations are now reaching its endgame. Prime Minister Theresa May said Monday her government was working extremely hard to save the deal. May is facing her divided ministers as negotiators scramble to secure a divorce agreement with the European Union. A deal must happen by Wednesday if there is any hope of an extraordinary EU summit this month to sign the withdrawal agreement. French authorities have paid tribute to the victims of the Paris attacks 3 years after the event. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, members of the government and elected officials attended a commemoration at the Stade de France. They remembered the 130 victims from 3 separate but coordinated attacks in entertainment venues around the capital. A 94-year-old former SS guard has arrived in court to testify in Germany. The man is accused of being an accomplice to a mass murder at a Nazi concentration camp in Poland. The former guard served as a watchman from June 1942 to September 1944 at the Stoffhof camp. His statement could make it a rare occasion for victims and relatives to hear directly from those accused of crimes during the Holocaust. Russia's opposition leader Alexei Navalny says he's been barred from leaving Russia. Now, he was about to travel to a hearing at the European Court of Human Rights in France. The court was expected to rule if his countless detentions have been politically motivated. In a blog posting, Navalny said he was stopped by border guards and told that a ruling by court bailiffs have stopped him from leaving Russia. The hearing could prove a major embarrassment for the Kremlin, which routinely dismissed Navalny's argument from Navalny, who's arguably Russia's most popular opposition figure. Thousands of Ethiopians and Eritreans have joined a 10-kilometer reconciliation run in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. This is the first joint sporting event since the two nations entered into a peace agreement back in July. The two countries fought a war from 1998 to 2000 that left 80,000 people dead. Now the neighbors have restored diplomatic ties, trade and phone links, resumed flights and reopened their common borders.
Very happy. I don't know how I can probably express my happiness to you. There's nothing more than love, reconciliation and happiness in this world. I am very happy.
I'm happy with the opening of the border. My brother has come back to Ethiopia after 20 years and we met.
The French oil giant Total is setting up an oil extraction project in Angola. The project contemplates 2 floating production storage vessels to deliver 230,000 barrels of crude oil a day. 15% of Angola's current production level. $16 billion will be invested in the project, the largest in that coast of the country. The second largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa was badly hit by a price plunge in 2014. A young Ugandan entrepreneur has revolutionized the diagnosis of malaria. 25-year-old Maurice Antoine helped to create a mobile app that can tell if a patient has malaria without using blood tests. Instead, the device clipped onto the finger is using light and magnetism. It detects changes in color, shape, and concentration of red blood cells. Now, malaria is the leading cause of death in Uganda.
On a personal level and still on a work level, it is communication. And when it comes more on work level, we are able to transition from doing apps for feature phones to doing apps for smartphones, which is the way to go because the penetration is increasing in Africa.
Uganda is holding its first ever beauty contest for people with albinism under the theme Beauty Beyond the Skin. 5 men and 5 women will be chosen to represent the country in the Mr. and Mrs. East Africa Beauty Contest in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, at the end of November. The event is aimed at raising awareness of the issues people with albinism still face throughout the continent. They also say it is a way to normalize and change how society perceives them. One Russian designer is a living example of the age-old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure, making high fashion out of recyclable materials. Artur Brazny visits junkyards near his home to collect the materials that most people consider garbage. Whether he's using bottles or aluminum cans, he is able to create an array of unique looks. His designs have won several fashion competitions, particularly a collection that turned newspapers into elaborate looks. And we've had a stylish enter the newscast. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourenglish.net. And join us on social media because we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Suni Gray. Thank you for watching.